Now we will enter into discussion of sources, that is the source terms that we can specify into CFX for various momentum or mass source or energy source. So there are 3D, 2D and 1D sources, and we will see what they mean and how to define them. So a very important concept when specifying a 3D source is basically a subdomain. So a subdomain is a 3D region within a predefined or already defined domain that can be used to specify values for volumetric sources. So whenever we say we have to specify volumetric source, whether it is momentum source or energy source, we have to create a subdomain, which is a part of a already created domain. So the source that we specify, the volumetric source that we specify in the subdomain, let's say we are specifying an energy source or heat source that goes into this particular term of the energy transport equation. So there is transient term, there is convection, conduction term, viscous dissipation term, and then additional term is source term. For example, we have a sort of a source here in this particular pipe that we are giving as a heater pipe. Also within a surface we can give a source, which we will discuss. So a boundary source is basically a 2D source which permits specification of sources as fluxes, that is source per unit area on the boundary surfaces. So that is also critical. And we can also specify a point source, which are actually a source 1D or point source that act on a single mesh element. So these are the 3 different source specification methods that are available to us. How do we create subdomains? So in order to create subdomains, we have to go to simulation setup, click on domain and say insert subdomain if you want to give a volumetric source. When we say subdomain, it will ask you for the name of that subdomain and open up a subdomain panel. So in that subdomain panel, first is the basic settings, which will specify location of that as well as the coordinate system, and then we have to specify what sort of sources we have to give, whether it's an energy source, continuity source or turbulence source, and we can specify it as a quantity of that source per unit volume. So that is the way we specify source terms. There are some simple rules that is to be followed for subdomain, is that a domain must exist before we create a subdomain, that it is, a subdomain cannot be created if there is no domain present, and domain can contain many subdomains. That within a single domain we can have multiple subdomains present, and the fluid subdomain must be in a fluid domain, whereas a solid subdomain must be in a solid domain. We can't mix match domains like that. And also sources or sinks may be constant or a function that or an expression that we can give. And a fluid subdomain source options are energy, mass, momentum source, radiation source term, additional variables or fluid components, and turbulence source term. So all these source types can be given, whereas in solid we can only give energy and radiation source term because there is no fluid flow present. An example of subdomain is sort of a catalytic converter type of geometry, where we give resistance source inside the domain. Filter type of a body is there. We give basically a resistance source as momentum source, and in a heat exchanger we can give heat source within the coil. So that is also an important application. To create a point source, what we have to follow the same thing, but instead of saying subdomain, we say that insert a source point, and we have to first name it, and then again the basic settings we have to just define the coordinates for that point to be created, and the source settings are same if you want to give energy source, mass source, or momentum source or turbulence source. There are also similar rules for source points, is that the specified source is distributed among the vertices of the elements in which the point is located, and the effect of the source will therefore become more pronounced as the mesh is refined. So since it is applied for a single element, the more finer the point is, the better the effect is. So that is an important concept. Also, momentum sources are not currently available at this point, so that is to be noted because it's a single point. So a source point in fluid domain can have energy source, mass source, turbulence source, and an energy point in solid domain can have only energy source. So